All right, hi class. I am going to show you how to do a quick GIF in Photoshop using a wide range of techniques in the video timeline. So this is where we're headed, and I'm going to walk backwards and do this from scratch, but just to show you where we're going, using a Hudson River Valley painting and a cat flying over it that is quite spacey. So you can see that we've got a whole range of different images here. We've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 images that are being combined to create this GIF. So let's start from scratch. I'm going to pause this, stop it, and go to File, New. And here I'm going to go to 1280 by 720 pixels and 72 pixels per inch since we're dealing with the screen. Don't have to worry about the advanced options right now. And do create. And we get a brand new image or blank canvas on our screen. And we want to make sure we are in the motion timeline. Yours, when you start out, might look something like this in the Essentials workspace. And to get to the motion workspace, 2 different ways. One, click on the workspace tab here and go to motion, or you can always go to window and workspace and motion. Once you're in here, I'm going to go to my assets folder and start bringing in my images that I've been collecting from the internet. And so file, place linked, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to bring in the first one and do place. And remember that once you bring in an image, you have to hit enter or hit the checkbox in order to put it inside your document. So to start out, I'm going to hit enter just to place these into my document. Place linked, go back, jumping cat. And I'll worry about sizing later. Place linked, galaxy, enter, file, and let's get that second galaxy. Place linked, galaxy, and place. And I'll stretch this one out. I'm holding on Shift and Alt or Option on the Mac to increase it proportionally from the center. And you can see that those are all listed inside my document, inside my layer window. And just to make this a little bit bigger, panel options. Cool. So since I'm going to do these one at a time, and I'm going to go through how to mask out different parts of it, I'm going to hide the layers that I'm not using. So I can even hide this background one. And what I want to do is I just want to keep this section of the image because I want to have in this section having where these rock formations are coming out, because I want it to feel like the cat is jumping out over and behind this element here. So what I'm going to do is go to any of my selection tools. I can go to the rectangular marquee tool or lasso tool or quick selection or magic wand tool. I'm clicking and holding to get to this little window underneath. And what should pop up is if I'm selected on a layer that's visible, is this select and mask function. And if it's not, you can always go to select and mask. And I'm going to select that. And it brings us to a whole new window. And when yours starts out, it'll probably look a little like this. And what I want you to do is switch the view here to overlay. And this is going to be a little bit easier for us to work with. And what this window does is, I'm zooming in using Command plus, is anything that we click and hold and highlight using this brush, which is, we want to be on this top one here. It uses an algorithm to select the objects within your image, recognizing the difference in the pixel data based on the selection that you've chosen. So if you have something that's in here, as you can see, I'm going to select this character here, and it does a good job recognizing that this character is different than these colors here are very different than the colors behind it, and so it's only going to select those elements. Same thing with the rocks, and I'm gonna hold down spacebar, click and drag over, and highlight these rocks here. And that's good enough like that. And there's one little spot we missed in between the legs here. And so right now you can see that there's a plus symbol on the inside of this brush. And if I hold down the minus symbol, I can go back in and, oh, did too much, Command Z to undo that. And that's pretty good. I could also shrink the size of this brush using the brackets. So I'm gonna shrink that down a little bit, Alt and, or plus, let's just do that. Great, that looks pretty good. And so you can see here, I'm just Command or Control minus to zoom out, that I just am gonna be left with a selection around these objects here. And yours will probably start out looking like this. Output selections, you wanna drop this down, and on this side, this menu, I'm gonna choose selection. Just because sometimes I like to see what I'm actually selecting. I don't want it to go directly to a layer mask. Because sometimes also I might have already had a layer mask on the layer and I just want to make sure that I'm going to do the next step correctly. If for some reason you chose the opposite item in here, you can always press invert underneath this menu and it will invert your selection to just choose the items that you wanted. You can also do that afterwards as well. So I say okay, and then you can see I'm going to have these beautiful marching ants all around the part of the image that I want to keep. And so I'm going to select my layer mask button at the bottom, this circle inside the square, and you can see that it's created a layer mask here inside the layer, and everything that I didn't want is hidden non-destructively. So I can always bring back that outside, and I'm going to show you why I'm doing this. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want the cat to jump out in between these two layers. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just increase the size of this so it matches the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to go Command T or Control T and just stretch this out a little bit. Stretch this out a little bit, and that's fine. I'm going to hit Enter to place it. And the next step is I'm going to duplicate this layer. And so I can either press Command J or Control J, and that duplicates the layer, or I can hold down Option and click and drag just like in Illustrator, and it duplicates my layer. I only need 2. With this, if I open up the Properties window, which I can also get to through Window and Properties, or this little icon here, what I want to do is invert this layer mask. So instead of hiding this one area, I want to bring back everything else. So if I do that, I've got this around it, and honestly, I don't really need the layer mask. I can just delete it. So I can drag it to the trash, and now I've got 2 layers, this one on top, and so I could place objects in between them. So if I bring this back, now this cat is going to appear holding down spacebar. Zoom out. This cat is going to appear in between these 2 layers, but I need to isolate and just select this one. So what I'm going to go through the same process that I just went through. I'm going to hide these 2 layers. So I just have this one. Go to Select, Select and Mask, and I'm going to draw a selection around this cat. There's also a function inside here. If you have an object that has a pretty different color background, such as a white background, or in this case, a blue background, if I undo everything I just did, so Command Option Z to go back multiple steps, I can click this Select Subject, and it should run an algorithm to detect the subjects. It might select both. Actually, I haven't tried it. So that did okay. It actually left a lot of these edges selected. So we can refine that. And I actually want to only want one of these. So I'm going to make this quite big, and I'm going to get rid of this. Holding down Option to get rid of that a little bit. Same thing, if I go down here, oop, too much. Command Z, let's bring this back. If I go to this one that is a little bit feathery, this other brush, what this allows me to do is feather the edges a little bit around the thing that I am choosing. So especially with hair, it'll do a much better job. And so I'm just doing some quick selections around this. And same thing here. Just gonna go around this cat. You can also use the pen tool to trace out a really exacted line around your, if you have a super complicated thing that you want to mask out, which I'll often use. And it looks like there's some pink that we don't want in here, so I'm gonna subtract that. Yeah, that was a little too much inside there. A little too much there. Just do a little general cleanup. Let's double check that. Yeah. All right. That seems good enough. And so what we're going to do is, with our output selection, output to a selection, say okay, we get our marching ants, and I'm going to create a layer mask around this. And that's, for right now, that's good enough. And we can see that this has a layer mask exactly of that cat. Since I want to animate this, I want to make sure that the layer mask is embedded into the object. Because if I try and animate this cat, what's going to happen is that it's going to move independently of the layer mask. And we want to make sure they're moving together. So I need to create a smart object for the jumping cat to be embedded into so I can animate it properly. And I'm going to right click over the text area, right click, and go to Convert to Smart Object. And what it's done is it's embedded that layer mask inside this object. If I need to go back and change that layer mask, it's really easy. I can double click on the icon here for the cat, and it brings me to a separate window which just contains this cat and its layer mask. So I could do a number of things. I could animate inside here, I could change the color of the cat, and I'll show you a little bit of about what that means a little later on. If I make any changes inside this window, I need to make sure I go to File and Save or Save As. Just do Command S or Control S and that'll work. And notice that this is a .psb, so this is a temporary file inside your other file. So I got my jumping cat. I have my two layers, my one with just the outline of this here, and my one on the bottom, and I'm going to come back to the galaxy ones a little later on. So the next step is to create a video timeline, and I'm going to do this using create, and it automatically generates a 5-second long timeline inside my Photoshop document. Whenever I move the blue playhead, it's going to show me the action, so I'm scrubbing through of whatever things that I have keyframed. And before we start animating, we want to do one thing, actually two things. The first one is click on this flyout window and make sure Enable Timeline Shortcut Keys is selected. This is going to allow us to press spacebar to get our animation to play. And secondly, we want to make sure set timeline frame rate. 24 frames per second is just going to run a little bit smoother than 29.97 frames per second. If you keep it default, it's fine, but I think this will help you out in the long run, especially if for some reason you wanted to have hand-drawn animation a little later on. You could do it 24, you could do it at 12, but I think this is a good way to go. So, okay. And it automatically shortens it. And you always want to do that at the beginning. If you try and set the timeline frame rate afterwards, after you've already done work, it's gonna mess with your animation. So you always want to start that from the beginning. Now, what I'm gonna do is start to animate this cat. And I'm gonna highlight this background, just click there and do Command 0 or Control 0 to make it fit to my screen. And I'm gonna drop down my layers. And since this is a smart object, I'm going to have transform. If you just dragged and dropped a image into here, you would have the option for position. And that would only allow you to adjust the position over time. Transform allows me to adjust the rotation or adjust the position or just the scaling over time. And since it is a smart object, we can't destructively edit this object. So I'm going to zoom out even more. I'm going to start with it small, and I'm going to drag it below. And we can't see it anymore. I know it's here. And I'm going to go to Edit and Free Transform, or Control T, and shrink it down, just so it starts out a little bit small. Zooming in, and I might shift it over a little bit, and I hit Enter. And notice that I initialize my keyframe by pressing the stopwatch, and I'm going to move my blue playhead forward to about 10 frames, and if I zoom in using this key down here, I can see I'm 12 frames, so let's go here. I'm going to go Control T or Command T again, and let's move this character up so I can see him. There he is, there she is, there the cat is, and I'm going to start increasing its size and rotating it a little bit. And when I hit Enter to make this free transform stick, or press this checkbox, it's going to create a keyframe for me right here. So I hit Enter, creates a keyframe. So now when I scroll back in time, it's going to look glitchy here a little bit, but when we render it out, it'll be totally fine. And we get it jumping up. Hey, what's up? So I want it to start out and jump up behind this rock form, but I want it to end by having it flip over in front of this thing. So the thing I need to do is bring this layer up on top, but I want to keep this one on the bottom. So the best way to do that is I'm going to cut this layer, and I do that using the scissors. And it cuts that layer. It made a copy of my cat, and if I drop this down, you can see that those keyframes are already there, so I know it's going to be in the exact same position. I'm going to take this cat and drag it up above this other layer. So now we can see that when this layer ends, if I move this one forward, you can see that there's no cat there, because in time, in this moment here, there's nothing. There's nothing to indicate any cat image. But then it starts up again right when we've placed the edge of our cat layer. So I'm going to drag this back, and I can delete this first keyframe. I'm going to select it and press delete. And I want to start here because I want it to be in the exact same position that it was. And I want it to increase in size a little bit. So I'm going to do Command T to make it get a little bit bigger and tilt it, just so it feels like it's flying up a little bit. Let's go like that. And then I'm going to have it dive back down. So I'm going to do Command T, rotate it, get a little bit bigger, and come down here. And I can look at it. I can go back and make sure this is doing what I want it to do. And jump in. It's going. I think I actually want this to be, sometimes you might have to adjust this. So let's see, I want this to be almost a little bit farther up. Yeah, all right. And we're gonna have this last one, Command T, make it even bigger, rotate it, and have it come off the edge, and hit Enter. All right, and let's play this back through. And one quick thing is I can zoom out, and this line here underneath, this is our in and out. So I can drag this so it only plays from the beginning to this end portion. Otherwise, it's going to play all the way through to wherever it sees the last layer inside your timeline. So if I press play, and I have it looping by going into this little settings window and loop playback. And if you find that it's running really slowly, you can change the resolution here to 50 or 25. Since it's just a preview, it's totally fine. It'll look fuzzy, but that's fine too. And down here, when it runs, when it says 24 frames per second, notice if I press play, it'll show me it's not actually playing real time if it's red. If it's playing real time, it'll be green. So it's actually running faster or slower than what I want. And so I need to slow this down a whole bunch. So I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to stretch these out. I'm going to move them all down. I can draw a selection around those, and let's do that. stretch this one, move this one, move this one. So if I press play, that's a little better. I like that tension of it jumping and then it quickly falls down over. So that's not bad. I think that's good. And so the next step that I'm going to do are using layer styles to have these two galaxy forms have an overlay on top of this image, so it's not just the waterfall. And the way to do that is I'm going to turn on this layer, make sure it takes up the whole edge. So I'm going to click on it to make sure I've selected it. Command T. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and Shift so it scales up proportionally. Hit Enter. And then right here in the layers box, we have all the options for our layer styles, or blend modes. And I'm going to choose overlay because I know that works based on what I did. But if you click inside here, it'll highlight blue, and you can press the up and down just to see how it interacts with the layers below. And I'm going to keep going until I get overlay. And I'm going to drop down the opacity on this because it's a little dark, because I just want a little bit of the galaxy, just a little bit of spaciness to come forward in here. All right, and let's see how that looks. Oop, and if that pops out, just drag it to the bottom until you see the blue light up. Then I can drag this back up, and I'm going to press spacebar. Cool, that's good. And so I want a different effect on the cat. I want it to have a different sort of space feel. So what I'm going to do is use a clipping mask. And what that does is it takes the shape of whatever you have underneath it. And so I'll give a demo. So first I need to see this layer. Command T, make sure it covers up everything. Enter. And so right now, this layer is right above this jumping cat. And so I want it to just be above where my jumping cat is, right here, because I don't want it to be above everything else. And it's fine if it extends out like that. And so a clipping mask is going to use this form. It's kind of the reverse of Illustrator a little bit. It's going to use the form of the cat and replace it with whatever is selected on top. So I'm going to right click on top of the layer that I want to be the clipping mask and create clipping mask. And you can see it used the shape of the cat to outline our form of the galaxy here. And so I could keep it like that, right? And I would just have the outline of the cat. But I think, again, if I lower down the opacity of this and turn this into lighten, then I can get this to feel more like a unique space cat. Let's see if I bump this up more. Yeah, let's keep it at 100. That's fine. And since I want the same settings here, I'm going to duplicate it. So Command J and bring this down right above my other cat. And I just want it to be over the selection for my cat. I'm going to have to zoom out, shrink this down. And now notice that it did not automatically do the clipping mask. Whenever you duplicate a clipping mask, it doesn't keep it. So I have to right click again, create clipping mask, and now we can see that that's going to be attached to my cat here, and it's going to remain the same since it's the same exact image as we use at the one at the top. So let's shrink this down a little bit. Command 0 to zoom in, spacebar, press play. All right, and then we get our jumping cat. All right, cool. So what I should have been doing all along is saving this, because sometimes Photoshop likes to crash. And so I'm going to make sure this is saved. So File, Save, and I'm going to call this GIF example 2. And that's fine. And I'm going to show you how to export it. So File, Export. And if you want to export as a GIF, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to go to Save for Web Legacy and click there. And this will take a second to load. And what you're going to want to do is make sure you have at the top here GIF selected and colors 256. If for some reason you need to go make it a file size a little smaller, here's where you might make that a different selection of a lower number. And everything else can stay the same, except for make sure animation looping options is forever. Sometimes by default it goes to once, and you want to make sure that this thing loops over and over. So forever. And you do save. And I've already saved one here, so GIF example 2 v2 and save. And if we open up Google, we can go to bring this inside here, drag it here. Let's do v2. There we go. So sometimes you might have to go back and adjust the timing, but overall, totally works. Has all the elements of our image that we had before. And if you want to export this as a video, what you're going to do is click on the little flyout window and go to render video. Now on the computers in our class, since many people log in, you want to make sure you save before you do this, because if someone else has rendered on the computer before you, oftentimes this is where Photoshop will crash. And so what I'd suggest is that during this project, if you're working in the computer lab, restart your computer before you begin working, just so you don't run into that problem. First thing, give your file a name, select folder, and I'm going to choose the same folder, which is my GIF2, select folder. This is example 2. I'm going to do this v2 since there's already one in there. And Adobe Media Encoder is going to save it as a video file. And we want H.264, which is a codec that wraps our video in a compressed file that all video players are going to recognize. And if you just wanted to export a particular part of your animation, you could choose your start frame and your end frame, but we want our work area, which is this element here, which is where I limited it just to have the first 26 frames. And I'm going to go render. And it takes a second. And so if I go to my GIF example v2, it'll open up here in VLC player. And it looks exactly like it did, which is pretty cool. Now, that's it for kind of showing you the basics of how to work within a GIF. What I was mentioning earlier about changing elements inside the layer, inside the smart object. So say I wanted something about this cat to change over time. What I could do is in the section here, I'm gonna select it just so I make sure I'm selecting the right one. Jump in cat copy, go inside here, and say I wanted to animate lasers coming out of its eyes, right? Create video timeline, and I'm going to make I'm gonna make a new layer here, and I'm gonna shrink the size of my brush, make sure this is like red, and I'm gonna draw some lines like that. And what I want to do is notice that since this is a rasterized layer, they are on position, so we're just going to have them move, right? So if I go to position and opacity, because I'm going to turn down the opacity of these so they start out small and they also move. I'm going to turn the opacity down to 0, move forward just a little bit, turn the opacity up all the way, and then move these off the screen. So if I move those off the screen like that, ooh, all right, I'll have to do this a little closer. There we go. And let's actually, we're gonna delete the opacity. We need to make sure that it's actually up to 100. There we go. Cool. And since I want this to happen over and over again, I'm going to shrink down this layer, and here's a little trick. What you want to do is Alt and duplicate the layer. You don't want to do Command J because that just duplicates it and without the properties. So you want to make sure to hold down Alt and duplicate this layer. And now if we look at this, all of these have the same properties. And I'm going to drag them next to each other. And what that does is it creates a video group. So if I then go in and select these and do Command J, it'll duplicate these over and over. And now we'll get this happening as a looped animation. And I'm going to save this doing Control S or Command S. And so if I go back to video example 2, now we have our laser beams coming out of the cat's eyes because it's automatically updated inside this file. So let's go to play. All right. Cool. So you can see how you can start to build up complex animations from something really simple. So like if it's a wheel, you can have it turn in one, you can have it spray dust. You can keep embedding over and over and over again as much as you want. I hope this is helpful, and I will see you all later.